Good afternoon or good evening, everybody. It's very nice to see some familiar names in the chat room. I'm Hélène Smuts. I have been guest curating an exhibition at the Javits Art Centre in Pretoria, part of Pretoria University, titled Willem Boshoff Word Woes. Depending on what your first language is, that could also read Willem Boshoff Word Woes. And I'm not translating because you're all good South Africans. This evening, we're celebrating a project we enjoyed enormously. Filmmaker Guy Spiller is with us. We produced 2 new documentary films, which we intended to be a personal encounter with the artist. You all know, those of you who are teachers, that Willem's been in the school curriculum for decades. He's very involved in tertiary education. He's been a professor at Free State University's Fine Arts Department for 10 years. Last year, he became the first artist ever in South Africa to achieve NRFA rating, which means we are all now finally being respected. So we thought it would be very nice to have a conversation with Willem. What you see on the screen are just some broad views of the exhibition. Do come and see it if you haven't yet. It's until the 27th of March this year. The exhibition is large. It wasn't really intended as a retrospective, but there is such a wealth of work. You all know Willem Boshoff is prolific. You go to his website, willemboshoff.com, you can look at any of the works and his own text on them. He's one of those rare artists who actually writes very well about his own work as well. So that, what you see now, is the second half of the exhibition. I'd say roughly after the year 2000. The first 2 slides were the early work, starting as early as the 1970s. So what we have here is the last 40, 50 years of our history, which for any South African is very valuable. Ivan Vladislavik says we have the advantage of hindsight. We have the privilege of hindsight and looking back at an artist's work. The other surprise I have for you is Willem's here. He's sitting next to me. We can come back to these slides just now. I'm going to give him a moment to say hello to everybody, and later on there will be opportunity for questions. We're going to ask you right now, please, to turn off your video screens and to mute as well, so that we can get a conversation going. Guy and I have been friends for 20 years, so we hope you are joining us in a very relaxed conversation here. But first, we'll go to Willem for him to say hello, and then we'll maybe just look at some of those slides again briefly.
Hello, everybody. The last year or 2 of my life has been strange because we couldn't teach directly in a classroom situation. We were hardly allowed in the university. There was a time when I wasn't even allowed to travel from my home in Joburg through to Bloemfontein, which is 400 kilometers away. We were blocked from traveling in another province. And then, so the COVID blocked and influenced a lot of the making last year and the beginning of this year. When this exhibition was opened, it was a miracle that it was opened on time. It was postponed a few times because of the COVID. And then it opened, and the support I had from the University of Pretoria, the University of Bloemfontein, the Javits Art Gallery, and then some independent people, the curator Hélène Smuts, decided on what work to put on, how the work was to be transported. I mean, all of this stuff was none of my business. I could carry on making art, which is what I do. I love making stuff. And then people started making films, and they would come and check out what I'm doing. And I haven't had so much attention ever, I guess. And I guess this film that you might see now, or the few films actually, the films are the result of people taking an interest and talking and finding ways to construct moments of making, moments and the work itself. And then I got COVID sort of in June, July. I guess I've had it for almost 8 months. it knocked me and took away my energy. But I still carried on making few small things. Haven't, but it was not very beneficial because they said I should have stayed in bed. And if I try and do that, I can't help myself. I have to make stuff. So now I have more energy today. The worst of it is seemingly it's gone. And while I'm confined to the house and stuff, I decided I must watch out that my health is okay because I suffered quite badly. So right now I'm having my teeth fixed. There's time for that. And then in the middle of all this, it seems as if nothing has changed. The whirlwind of attention and interest and activity around the strange things that I make has now manifested itself in film form. And I've seen the films, and I'm a little bit, I'm kind of spellbound by,
Spellbound.
spellbound. I'm flustered by it all because am I actually able to live up to what the films portray? Am I going to make it in this life to be the guy in those films? And what is that guy in these films going to say if I wander off the road that I've chosen and mess things up? He will be very angry with me. So I have some kind of an example or something to live up to. If I'm good enough, I might just make it to. You guys have put me on the spot, and thank you very much for that.
That means that I guess we can declare that these films are officially open like they used to do in the old days with a pair of scissors and a big lint. So thanks to Willem for that. Can we just go back to some of those images, Danielle, of the exhibition? Yeah, there we go. So what we're looking at here, and I see Julia Charlton is with us. So Julia will forever be my hero because Wham loaned us this very fragile work, Abumfusa Lawula, that you see in the middle there, made in 1997. And it pays tribute to the struggle songs that were sung by school children in 1976 in Soweto who were protesting Afrikaans. Now, Willem Boshoff is a conceptual artist. He works primarily with words and language. We all know this. We know he's written dictionaries, which is probably why the NRF couldn't say no to an A rating. Who else has written dictionaries in this country? The entire exhibition, therefore, is focused on Willem working. And something he said once, which is very fascinating, and that is that any artwork he makes and any work on this exhibition is a conceptual book. And he's challenging us to read them. So we made that a curatorial focus, and also the idea of locking and unlocking. You know, in the 1970s, 80s, I don't know if anyone here can remember that, but there was a time when we didn't have computers. And to store knowledge, you would put it in a book. And the problem with a book is that it also locks it up, and then you have to open that book and unlock that knowledge. So it's an interesting thought whether computers and the internet make knowledge more fluid. There's so many questions thrown up always on this one focus on language, also how we receive it, how long language can privilege or it can exclude. So on the screen now, you're seeing on the right, the large black work made in black granite called the Death of Afrikaans. Now that work was finished 2 days before the opening, just about. We installed it, but the list of words on it, of rare, beautiful Afrikaans words that Willem says he was tasting. For 10 years, he was tasting those words. They are basically untranslatable, some of them. And you have there what is basically a monument to Afrikaans. And interestingly, at our opening on the 13th of March, where we had vast crowds, safely, amidst COVID, but it was fantastic to have people in a real opening. That was the work that Johan Meiberg spoke to in his opening speech. And the CEO of Javet Legeto Makola also referred to it. It really grabbed people's attention. Right next to it, the smaller whitish work is called Fallen Two-Letter Words. About, you can go and look on the website, Willem wrote that in the 1980s, in the apartheid era, Afrikaans was a bit of a bully. As a language, it was a bully. And he grew up in that, and Afrikaans is his first language. We all know about Cake Afrikaans and Dada and deconstructing that language. Here with fallen two-letter words, if you've ever walked on the beach, you'll know that as you walk next to the shallow water, little twigs and feathers, flotsam is laying at your feet coming out of the sea. And he was saying, in a sense, that's where Afrikaans is, and that very often, you know him, you know he loves Dada, that it's when something is at its point of nothingness, that's when it grows. That's when something interesting comes out of it. And today, the third most spoken language in South Africa is Afrikaans. I don't know if you knew that, but it's a fact. Oh, and here we have in the film, in the first film, those of you who have watched it, you see Willem making this work. This work took 2 years to make, not so? And it's constructed, shall we go to the next slide? It's constructed of tiny pieces of paper glued in to a 3-meter canvas with tweezers. It's an extraordinary work. And it's explained in the film. The word blue refers to the plight of the blue crane, our national bird, which is in danger of extinction. But also along came COVID, and suddenly we were all feeling blue. How many jazz compositions use the word blue for feeling miserable? And any kind of illness, COVID or pain, or whatever, blue is a word that resonates with us very much. So extraordinary about this exhibition, I've mentioned that Willem is prolific, but there are large new works from 2021 that are on the show as well, which is, I think, pretty impressive, going back to the 1970s up to now. Our last slide for you to look at, you've seen this before with other works, is called the Druids Keyboard. Those are not stone pebbles, those are made with wood, different types of wood, some of them very rare and very expensive. There are 26 of them, am I right? 36, because represented there are the letters of the alphabet and the numbers 1 to 10. And this is part of a triptych called the Tree of Knowledge. We couldn't exhibit the other two because they are quite fragile. But here is your link to what Guy chose as the title of his films. The Big Druid, Man of Trees. Second one, the Big Druid Land Art. A lot of the films you'll see, a lot of the scenes were filmed at Nyrock Sculpture Park. So we say big thanks to Gabe Nobo, curatorial director, and to CEO Lefeto, to Javid Art Center, and to our partner, the Villa Will, the Claire and Eduardo Villa Will Trust, and Benji Liebman of Nyrock Sculpture Park. And at that point, I'm going to hand over to Guy. Guy has been making films focusing on science and heritage for a very long time. If you've been to the Origin Center, the Museum of Rock Art, you'll see his films there. He's well known for a series called Tobias's Bodies. There was a series called A Country Imagined. He made several of those episodes. I've put his Vimeo link on the chat room. You can see that. Guy and I've been working in an NGO called Africa Meets Africa, where we explore and document rural arts and use them to teach interdisciplinary subjects. And if you go to africameetsafrica.coza, you'll see film clips of his films linked to books, resource books that we've also developed. So a very broad-ranging filmmaker, and the most sensitive one I know. So when this project came up, I knew Guy was my man. So I'm handing over to him now to tell us more about the making of the films. After that, there will be time for your questions. And we look forward to a very informal conversation. Okay, over to Guy.
Hi, everybody, and thanks for coming. Yeah, it's been amazing working on these films because, well, we did it quite a while ago in quite sort of, as Willem was saying, like under the sort of COVID lockdown and things. And it kind of meant that we kept things very small, which was probably just as well. Probably it was a help in the end. We had a tiny crew, and we just sort of focused on Willem, really, rather than trying to get other people in, which would have, you know, sort of exposed us possibly to the virus, etc. So COVID was one thing that was part of the making of these, when Willem says like he's a bit worried about that guy in the movies and in the movie and looking up, you know, and living up to that reputation or what that guy says. I mean, I don't think Willem will really mind. I mean, he's always unpredictable, loves breaking rules, especially his own. So it'll just be another departure point for him to move on to new stuff. You know, when I was briefed about these films, it was the one film was going to be on the Big Druid and Willem's Druid persona that had sort of evolved over the sort of last 10 years or so, and also his work at his land art at Nyrox, and plus we added in another piece of land art. But you know, there were certain challenges, but overall, I mean, it was great working with Hélène. Hélène knows Willem's art, and we've worked together for a long time. So I always had someone there to sort of help me get my head around that part of Willem. I mean, obviously, the first film about the Big Druid was we decided that film was going to go into Willem the man, whereas the one largely set at Nyrox would be coming out of him into the world, into nature, into human evolution, into the cosmos, into the universe. But the first film, the Druid film, would be going into the psychology of what made this Druid, the worldview of this Druid, the philosophy of the Druid, and try and see what made the Druid tick, and which then leads to the artworks. Whereas the other one would be the artworks helping us look at the man. I had to do a fair bit of research. As I said, Hélène knows Willem's work very well, and so she was a great source of information. But also there were various books, and even Ivan Vladislavich wrote a really good book, which was very insightful and made a lot of the social and political connections that Willem sort of got taken up by, you know, right through his career. And then Willem's house is incredibly interesting and says so much about him. And so we decided that first film would be made exclusively at Willem's house. We used to sort of call it the Druids Lair. I don't think Willem calls it that, but that's how Hélène and I started referring to it. And it's full of collections, all neatly arranged and catalogued, whether it's in drawers, on the shelves, in his computer, in the library. At first glance, it can look like a sort of cornucopia of stuff, but it's all been very well catalogued. And this is part of Willem's sort of method, if you like, of being very clear and careful where everything fits in. So let me just show some of these photos. So also at Willem's house is just tons and tons of plants, and this is our starting point for the film. How he's a man of trees, and he's busy trying to learn all the plants in the world, and the house is full of specimens of trees, and tree roots, and collections of plants and pots, all carefully labeled and named. And then, you know, to try and understand this Druid character, it was necessary to have a sort of narrative in this film. And it turned out that the narrative, the most obvious narrative was that there was this man who loved trees and plants. And this was, you know, I don't know that Willem's actually come out with his illness problems and how that changed him and his art before. And this was at the heart of this film. And so he told us how he nearly died of lead poisoning. And then how he went for chelation therapy, and then was the first artist to have a residence at Nirox. And while he was there, he was walking through the, well, it's in the movie, you've seen it. You know, he started to see images in the stinkwood trees of human characteristics. And this led to this Druid person doing his Druid walks and his Druid cubicle. And Willem started to feel like he was a Druid, not because he wanted to be like a Druid, he just noticed that he was behaving like a Druid. And so in the film, you know, I wanted to get the sense of repetitious, sort of mesmerizing, sort of hypnotic almost work that he does to relieve the pain. And luckily he was working on this artwork, Blue, which is, it's got millions of pieces to it, and each little piece has to be put in place methodically. And this is what he used to spend the nights doing to take away the pain. And the sort of, so it was very fortunate that when we made the film, Willem was busy on a work that so clearly described the process that he was going on. And so we spent a lot of, well, we shot scenes there, which we used repeated in the film to kind of give a sense of the repetition. And then we had Willem looking at his collections and how he uses them as thinking objects to like almost divining objects. And this became part of the Druid's persona, as do all these things. And okay, I'm going to stop sharing here. And then the other film at Nirox was completely different. As I said, it was more looking out into the world and the universe from the point of view of Willem. And it's more about nature and trees, and because these 5 or 6 artworks were there, you know, the obvious sort of way of doing this was to have Willem at each artwork and talking about them and where the idea came from and why he felt compelled to make them. We didn't really get into how they were constructed. They're all pretty huge, and there was a lot of construction involved in them. But we stuck to his motivation for making them and what they meant, really. The other thing that decision that we made was to make both films told by Willem in his own words, rather than getting other people in. I mean, as I said earlier, partly it was because of COVID, but I think we might have done that anyway because he's the best person to do it. And in the short amount of time we had for each film, about 15 to 20 minutes, it made sense that to hear it from himself, to give it that personal quality, and as though you're going on a journey with him. Yeah, that's good for me, Hélène. Then if you want to take questions or anything.
So at this point, having seen what very good friends of ours are in the chat room, if there are any questions to Guy or even to Willem, you're very welcome to ask them. You're welcome also to unmute yourself, I think, Danielle, not so, to ask those questions, or you can type them in the chat room. Something that I enjoyed very much was we had these 2 distinct films at 2 distinct places, but there was a very wonderful flow from the one into the other guy. I know you're a very good scriptwriter, but was that something that came naturally to you? There is the narrative background, of course, that Willem explains that after having had chelation therapy, went to Nirox and basically started walking there again. And part of the Big Druid artwork is taking Druid walks with his point and shoot camera and looking at things and seeing and observing. I like that about your films a lot, the way that the first one flowed into the second one.
Yeah, well, there was that one scene that in the first film that was obviously shot at Nyrox
Oh, yes.
and made that link.
Yeah.
And in the second film, he also mentions like being there at the start of Nyrox, and he says he, which we know as Benji, asking him what he would make if he could make anything for this sculpture park. What would he make?
What do we make? And
And
that became the Children of the Stars series of huge grand sculptures. Yeah.
Sorry. I'm trying to type because my Wi-Fi is very unstable. I wanted to know what are you going to do with the forms, and how can people see them? Where can people see them?
Where can people see them? We will, Hélène and Danielle, you're welcome also to respond. This is our launch. It's a window of 2 days, and we will certainly distribute them, and we'll let you know on the website. They're such wonderful films that one would like to release them internationally as well. So with our partners, we are discussing that at the moment and how that will happen. They'll also be available on Willem Boshoff's own website. I've typed that website address in, and we'll signal for you as soon as they are available. Because certainly for me, I'm an arts educator, and it's not very often that people have a direct encounter with Willem Boshoff. You know, it's sort of impossible. There are many requests always, but this is another way for people to engage with him, talking about the philosophy behind the work and so on. So for me, that was another strength. I don't know how everybody else feels like that. I think there are quite a few tertiary educators in our room.
I think it's always interesting to see the process for those of us who aren't artists. It's wonderful to hear the artist speak about how he thinks about it, you know, how he gets to the work. And I think that the films are fascinating. And I actually think the length of it works, because it's almost like a little artwork, which I really loved. So I hope it can be seen widely.
No, it certainly will. And it's important for us as well. It's interesting that you say that, because, it's a big exhibition, but I think we could have curated 4 exhibitions or 5 with how much work there is. Willem is a very prolific artist, and much the same with a film. And I think making a film and knowing when to end it is as important as it is to know when to stop your painting. So thanks for that, Diane. I also like the length of it. We could have gone on and on and on. Guy and I have made other films that are an hour long with an educational focus. And I think this one, I think that's part of Guy's mastery, is to have this vast volume of material and to weave a very delicate thread to bring it together. Because there is a logic there, but it's not a logic that locks things up. It's a logic that releases. And that logic, a lot of writers have observed with Willem as well, is there is a narrative. His life is a narrative, and very often the artwork relates to that narrative as well.
Very much. Thanks for the privilege, Willem, indeed, tonight to be able to attend. And I've been revisiting your exhibition at the Javid, and revisiting. I've been going back several times with friends and relatives. It's really just been amazing. Hélène, just maybe a question for you. Would you be able at some point to access that wonderful speech that Johan Meiber made at the opening?
Yeah. Do you know how popular that speech is? I've had many requests like that, and we are working on a publication, and it'll certainly be in there. But if you would like to contact me, if you really would like to read through it soon, by all means, I'm helenesmuts@gmail.com. I'll send it to you.
Thank you. And thanks again to you, Willem, as well.
Yeah. There's a question from David Bond asking Willem, I wonder if Willem has any comments on how being filmed impacted him. It's an exhausting business. Can you answer that question?
When somebody tells you they want to film you, my reaction is to get a big fright. And I go through blood, sweat, and tears beforehand, thinking that I'm going to mess it up. It's not my medium. I don't make films. And I hope I don't disappoint them. So I go through some self-searching and doubt. And I think it's good that I'm uneasy and worried. it sort of makes me try harder because I want the film to be a success. And afterwards, when I see myself in the film, I become a little embarrassed. I think I could have done better, maybe, because I'm, you know, I know the things that I say in the films are things that I know very well, that I have said very often to many people, and I'm always thinking that I can do better than that. And I'm hoping that that I don't shoot myself in the foot by what I say in the films, but it's been thought through, it's been calculated somewhat, the things I say in the films, and so eventually what happens is what happens, and then you have to accept what comes out. And then I think, answering the question directly, these films and the publication, because the publication has taken a year, more than a year, 2 years, of contacting many people. So the film is more directly focused on me, but in the publication, there are voices from all over the world, and they all speak very highly of me and make me feel slightly embarrassed. And I don't know if I'm really can live up to the things they say, and the same with the films. So in the end, I think I have to try harder, or I have to do better. The film has shown a certain level or angle, and how do I improve upon myself? Because in giving myself in the film, I think I can do better. I'm worried that I did some things inferiorly, or I come short. So those are things that drive me in my work. Luckily, I'm not going to go on and on making films. Let other people do that. But if I'm in the films, that's a problem, because I might be, might be misunderstood, or I might be overacting. So, but in my work now, then it helps me to work harder. It helps me to think more carefully before I say stuff, before I do stuff, I guess. And thank you very much for the films. The fact that, as I said before, they put me on the spot. And my very first speeches I ever made at exhibition openings, I stuttered, I blushed, I tried. And eventually one gets over oneself and you let things flow and you speak more fluently. So I guess if I do this often enough, I might become boring, but at least I will become more fluently. So I'm hoping that I won't bore the spots off you. I hope that I'm hoping to do better. Thank you.
You will have noticed in the first film, especially, that the Druid tells us that the moment we think we know anything, we're lost. That's fundamental Big Druid and Willem Boshoff philosophy, is to embrace uncertainty, which all of us who are a little bit older here, we know that eventually one learns that, but that's a big lesson to learn, and a good one to hear. I was looking at everyone who's here and thinking back to the 90s. Remember the first Johannesburg biennial, 1995, and then the second one in 97? And just what that era, the 70s and the 80s, were, and how isolated we were. Remember, we had cultural isolation because of apartheid, and we were also cut off from the rest of Africa. So one thing that I hope people would take from the exhibition is a sense of where we're coming from and how things change, but things also stay the same. And I think that fundamental principle of always remembering that we don't know, the philosophical acceptance that we don't know, is our only saving grace. In the exhibition, we have 90 pieces from the blind alphabet. You'll remember Julia is here. She was a curator in 95. The blind alphabet is probably the most famous work by Willem. And the letters A, B, and C were exhibited at Joburg Art Gallery, 338 of them. So we gathered 90 words from the blind alphabet, several from the letter A, the whole of letter F, letter G and H, and then the very new one. If you come to the Javet, you'll see those for the first time. One of the big collectors of Willem's work is a French collection, the Javan and Matthias Leridon collection, and they commissioned, wait for it, the letter L. So there are 30 new words starting with the letter L that you can see there. And in the first slide I showed you, you could see those boxes and the shadows. Of course, you may come and observe them. You may not lift the lids. For that, you will need a blind guide.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. Hi, good evening, Hélène and Willem.
Hello there. Yes, Professor Ronelle Evans. She's a linguist.
That's not going to be my comment. No, I just wanted to, I don't know whether I'll articulate this very well, but I wanted to perhaps just share a feeling that I had while watching the films. I have an interest in film study as well. And I found a disjunct between watching the films, and again, one could look here in terms of a spatial disjunct, perhaps, but also maybe even linking it to COVID. As I said, I haven't thought this through very carefully. But when I've stood in the exhibition where actually everything is right there with you, and you're sort of faced by these incredibly large voices, you know, the artwork, I felt exceptionally close to what was being said and what was being shared, everything that was being presented either on the walls or on you know, whatever the pillars were that things were mounted on. And yes, it has to do with the medium. I watched on an iPad and, you know, not visibly in a room, but I felt so distant. It was as if things were out there, as if I was wanting to come closer all the time. Yet ironically, I was 15 centimeters away from the device, whereas in the exhibition hall, one was several meters away in order to get the message. As I say, I'm mulling over the sense of disjunct that I had watching the film, but it's just something to think about. Maybe someone's got some interpretation for that feeling of mine.
I have a comment for you because it's something that fascinates me about the work. There's a linguistics professor, in fact, for you, called Carol Clarkson, who's written interestingly about this. She wrote a book called Drawing the Line, Ronelle, and in that she talks about something she defines as the aesthetic act. I think the reason why you felt so close to those works in the exhibition is because they were talking to you. We looked at Abumfusa Lawula earlier, which has struggle songs in big font in South African languages, indigenous languages. And then if you can't speak any of those languages, if you only speak English, you have to walk right up to the work, have your nose next to it because the translation is there, but in a tiny font. So what is happening there? That's not you walking into the exhibition, observing the work and making judgments about it. The work is making judgments about you, because if you have to walk straight up to the work to read the translation, anyone else who walks in knows that you only understand English. And Willem Boshoff does that a lot. He also does that with blind alphabet, where you need a blind guide to translate the meaning of the words for you. They have been sculpted in wood, so you're talking about the morphology of the word and its meaning. So again, there he's making you aware of the power of language, how it disadvantages some and how it empowers others. So I love your question, because film, and look how much TV we all watch and movies, it's especially now with lockdown, we live through movies, and you know, that's what takes us out there. But because Willem captivates you so closely between those walls in the gallery, and he gets you thinking, and he displaces you spatially, it's a very interesting observation, because now watching the movie, of course, that's out there. It's not in this confined, defined space. It's in a home, it's in a garden, it's in Nirox, the enormous, beautiful Nirox sculpture park. So those are the thoughts that came to me. Is there anyone else who would like to comment about what Ronelle has told us and what she felt?
Well, I presume you're talking more about the ones at Nirox than Willem's house. And perhaps it's just that they're in such a huge space,
Yeah,
that, you know, that sense of space is very present all the time there. And you become like these small figures in this huge landscape, and small sculptures, when in fact they're actually very large. It probably shows you how much larger a sculpture one could do in a space like that.
mm. And also land art is something completely different. Maybe Willem can comment. It also confronts you, but it's an outdoor space. It stirs you in very different ways. But your point's very interesting, Ronelle, and I think it relates a lot to lockdown and the way we've been living lately. You know, the only reason we're not all desperately claustrophobic is because we can watch movies on our laptops and so on. But I must tell you, the joy we had at the opening of people saying, thank God I'm seeing a real exhibition. I mean, everybody was missing Willem Boshoff. They came for the Boshoff. They were starved of it. But it was a joyous occasion because it was concrete and we were in that space. Interesting thoughts from everyone. Good. Tracy, what would you like to ask us?
Hi, Lynn and Willem and Guy. This is great. I just wanted to comment, adding to Ronelle's point around how one experiences the artwork exhibition and in the film, is the other element of access, and which is always a political element as well in Willem's work. You know, the access of language, of the visual, and who gets allowed into that. And I think the metaphor of the Druid, which is both, you know, the physical entity and philosophy that Willem embodies, but which is also then the invitation of the films and the exhibition, is to be invited into a type of Druid walk with Willem and with the works and with the curators. And that for me extended a type of poetry where Willem's works are always like spells, because like the language that gets explored in the works, it's also about access, but it's also about activating language, activating words, and who is able to access those things and take one on a journey. And that was just something that I found really beautiful about both the exhibition and experiencing the access that the films allow us in terms of taking us through those artworks. So yeah, just a comment. Thanks.
That's a wonderful comment. Thank you, Tracy. And Willem was pleased to see your name there also. Something he's been doing for the last few years that is so fascinating as Professor of Fine Arts at Free State University is once a year he takes the first years into the Karoo and they make land art. And we've all been first years. We all know how much we need to learn and we need to turn our heads around. And that has become an extraordinary thing at Hari Sutama's map art project in Richmond. And there, I think the encounter of that harsh Karoo landscape, sometimes extremely cold, it's even snowed some years. I came across a fabulous quote the other day by Borges saying the best kind of labyrinth is a desert because you can't escape it. So all of this is about how we engage with space, and indoor space and land art in the outdoor space. I think we're all going to walk away because we're almost finished and the questions are going to come to us then.
I wonder if I could ask Guy a question.
Please do.
Sure. Hi, Guy. So
Hi.
I'm really interested in the relationship between art and artists and space. And so I'm wondering, given where you are in your work and in your career and your life, how working in this kind of Druid narrative and Druid space with Willem and the others, how has it helped you reflect on your own work and how you make films?
Well, yeah, well, that's quite interesting because, I mean, I've made a lot of science films and a lot of films that need a very, very strong narrative to keep people on a track. And I find that I'm interested in a lot of the same things as Willem, like trees, nature, human evolution, the cosmos and the universe. But I think it's been very liberating to see it from a sort of, from such a sort of point of view of the Druid and a sort of, I mean, it is an artistic point of view, but it needn't be if the Druid wasn't an artist, for example. So I've found it very rewarding at this stage to sort of break down some of my own sort of rules around how one puts things together. But at the same time, some projects need those sort of things. And there's always some things you learn, and some things that get kind of reinforced, like Hélène was saying, don't ever think you know everything. Not that I would, but it's reassuring to hear someone else say that you never know, and these kind of more Dadaist kind of approaches to things, and using the element of chance in the Druid walks. That's incredibly appealing to me these days. I don't think it used to be. It used to try and control things too much, but in editing, I've always been aware of how chance edits, and you don't get it so much on digital editing, but on editing on actual film, used to sometimes run a reel of outtakes, and suddenly you'd see like a fantastic cut, and you'd grab onto that and use it. Yeah, so I would just say, every project that I do, I learn so much, and this one, I think what I've learned is things that I never thought I would learn. It's been very liberating and inspiring.
Thanks very much, Guy. I think Guy is a master of landscape filming. I've watched him. I've run around rural places with him, and he has an extraordinary sense of landscape. We're almost at the end, but the artist would like to say something. If there are no other questions, can I hand over to Willem? Anyone else? Okay, so we're going to have the final word from the Druid, and I thank you all for joining us. It's been lovely to see you all here. And we'd love to see you in the exhibition closing 27th of March. I do curatorial tours every now and then. My email address is helenesmuts@gmail.com. There was one question about Johan's speech. Any other questions, you're most welcome to write to me. So thanks, everybody. Thanks to Danielle Puleng, Gabi, and Legeto, and everybody, Larkin, Tlotlo. I'm handing over to Willem.
Guy, thanks for confessing that you're learning, that you don't really know everything, that there's always a chance of opening one's mind and learning more. And you use the phrase, you never know, you always get more, you get another chance to stuff your head with relevant, irrelevant, interesting, boring. You struggle and fight to satisfy this hunger in your head. You never know. But I made an artwork of that, and you know it very well. It says you never know. It's about 60 meters in diameter. You know,
It's in the film.
It's in the film,
Mm.
and there's an aerial shot of it. And to say that you never know has many edges to it, because if you buy the lottery ticket, you do so hoping to win some money, because you never know. You might actually score by doing a ridiculous thing. You never know. So you've got to risk. You've got to do stuff that nobody else might do or might think that you would do. And you've got to be prepared to get your head chopped off. But if you don't, you know, if you do risk, you might be successful. You never know. There is the work. It's very big. It's massive, and it's in an amphitheater. People sit in there. 600 people sit in that green space, watching concerts, music concerts, and speeches and stuff. And well, it takes a while to walk from one side of the work to the other side. That's one thing. And then finally, I just want to say this thing of comparing an artwork to a photograph, comparing an artwork to a film, to images in a film, comparing an artwork to what people say about it. It never equates. What was the lady who spoke?
Yeah, was it Renelle?
Renelle, hey.
I think it was
who said that the disjunction.
Yeah.
Now, that disjunction is always there. I have seen the most ridiculous, stupid artworks being photographed.
Yeah.
And you look at a photograph and you see these glorious things.
This is true. We're all laughing, I think.
But the opposite also happens. You work yourself to death on an artwork, and they come and take photographs, and you see it in a catalog. Oh my God, look at what they've done to the artwork. It looks ridiculous. That is inevitable, that disjunction between the representation, either in linguistic form, what people say about it. They can talk so nicely that you think it's a wonderful thing, but when you see it, it lets the air out of your tires, or where does the air come out? So you have to know that you must compensate, and you must find a way to, as an artist, and having real artworks and looking at what other people have done with it, you have to forgive, you have to praise, both praise and forgive, and live with it. You can't help for it. You can't help if people write badly about your work in the newspaper. Shut up, live with it. It's your lot in life as an artist. Dentists don't get criticized in the newspaper. Lawyers don't get criticized, but artists do. They get ripped to pieces. They get praised. Live with it. Just be quiet and see if that will help you make better work. That's all I can say. Thank you very much.
And just on that note, that's why it was such a pleasure to have Guy Spiller make these films, because I was never worried and the outcome was fabulous. So thanks to Guy, and thanks to everybody for joining us and your questions, which I'm going to ponder further. Helene Smuts@gmail.com. You're very welcome. Thanks to everyone.